Next presentation from Internet2 about services, experiences in California. We have Andrew Keating, and is Noah going to be with you?
Noah's right here. Yeah.
Hey, Noah, how you doing? Noah Whitman. Andrew is responsible for infrastructure, platform, and security programs within the Internet2 NET Plus cloud service portfolio. We all heard about that today. And assists with business development and service validation activities for others in different categories. He received his PhD from UC Berkeley in 2011. He's still young, yeah. And joined Internet2 in 2012. And I'll let you want to introduce Noah?
Sure. Yeah.
Or,
well,
actually, I'll go and introduce him. You're up here already. And Noah Whitman is the co-founder and program manager of Open Knowledge and the public interest OKAPI? Okapi. That's a new one on me, which brings together faculty, students, and staff at the University of California, Berkeley to share knowledge and creativity using the internet and new digital technology. So, guys, take it away. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, and thank you all for sticking around. I know it's late in the day, and we've had a lot of great presentations today. We're going to kind of shift gears in this conversation from the previous few presentations because, you know, Noah and I are coming from the higher ed community, and we're going to talk about cloud services that have been developed by the higher education community. So unfortunately, we don't have any Minecraft or any really fun stuff related to teaching to share with you today, but hopefully we'll have a good discussion here about some of the cloud services that can facilitate teaching and learning in both K-12 community colleges and the higher ed community. So the NET Plus program was developed by a group of Internet2 member universities several years ago. It's about 2 years old now, begun in about March of 2012. And it started with a group of universities getting together to develop cloud services for the research and education community. So NET Plus is really about customizing commercial services, customizing services developed by the community for research and education. The program's about 2 years old, as I mentioned. Currently today, there are 18 services that have gone through the service validation process, and I'm glad when we get to questions and comments from the audience to elaborate a bit more on what service validation entails. But we have 18 services that have gone through that validation process. 15 services are currently undergoing validation by the community. And in California, to focus in on our state, we have 10 California universities that are subscribing to the NET Plus box service, and that's out of about 70 to 75 universities nationwide. So you can see that California has been very active with that one service. In terms of other services, as you see up there, Blue Jeans is a service available for video conferencing, Canvas, CrashPlan, DocuSign, EduRoam. These are some of the services that California universities have been specifically involved with. So that's a bit of background on NET Plus and what the program is all about. Again, it's about offering customized versions of cloud services for the research and education community. And now I want to engage with Noah a bit, and I have some questions for him. I should also say that originally we anticipated having several universities represented here and not just being a UC Berkeley oriented panel, but that means we're going to put a lot of you in the audience on the spot to ask your questions and to share your experiences with cloud services or things like that in a few minutes. But Noah, if you could tell us a bit about the cloud services that Berkeley is currently deploying, the experiences that have happened on campus with cloud services at Berkeley, and then the background of how Berkeley's been working with the community through the NET Plus program. I think that we'll go from there.
Great. Should I use this one? Yeah. Okay, just to introduce myself a bit further. So I work at UC Berkeley in the Information Services and Technology Department. So that's the central IT department. And I've been there around 6 years. And in that time, I've been involved in the design and launch and overseen a number of services on campus, including file management, media management, project collaboration, and web publishing, to name a few. And so what's interesting for me is over the past few years, I've been able to sort of observe this trend of the sort of movement towards the cloud. So can people hear me if I don't lean in? Okay. Oh, good. And also, I should say, for the last year, I've been working with Andrew in the Net Plus initiative as it relates to our box service, and I'm a member of the advisory board there. And so it's funny, you asked me about what cloud services we have on campus. And if you were to ask me this question a few years ago, I wouldn't have much to say. But over the last couple of years, we've now moved to Google Apps for Education. So we're using Google for basically the core apps. We have email, calendar, Drive, and Docs turned on, and we're considering extending that to other core and non-core apps. Our new learning management system is powered by Instructure Canvas, a cloud app. We have a pilot of Blue Jeans, which is a service for web and video conferencing. Our online course evaluations are now being powered by a cloud service. And those are all apps that have the potential to reach, let's say, more than 10,000 users, 50,000 users. If we're talking about less than that, I mean, I think there's cloud, there's a Salesforce, there's any number of other applications. So this has been an important phenomenon of moving to the cloud. Let's see, in terms of, what were some of the other questions?
Yeah, sure. So if you'd say a bit about, what you've been working on with Net Plus versus, kind of commercial cloud services or cloud services where Berkeley works directly with the service provider, and maybe say a bit about what's been different with the Net Plus approach and what's worked and what hasn't on the various approaches. Because with all cloud services, the university or the educational institution is basically taking a service off of the campus and entrusting it to a commercial provider or perhaps a community provider. And so, there are risks associated with that. And so maybe you could say a bit about, the different sorts of ways that Berkeley has engaged with providers in the cloud space.
Okay, so good. That's some good framing. So let's talk about cloud versus non-cloud, and I think that there's some things to say about sort of the value of the Net Plus initiative. So I think there's some very clear advantages of. So what does cloud versus non-cloud mean? I mean, I think at Berkeley we've had sort of both the luxury and the opportunity to make some problems for ourselves in terms of developing our own services in-house with both commercial and open source offerings. So the idea that we can do it ourselves and do it better, I think we're moving away from that. If there's somebody who's solving a problem in a particular space and doing it at scale, they're very often doing it. They have better features. They're doing it in a more cost-effective way. And I think a few years ago the concerns were mostly about security, policy concerns, security, privacy. There are also some concerns about edge case use scenarios where we had a local homegrown solution, and how do we address this particular need if we move to a new solution. But I think in general, what we're seeing is that a lot of these concerns about use of student data in the cloud, well, we've solved that. We've moved to Instructure Canvas as our LMS. Concerns about disclosure, about confidential information. That was one of the big barriers, I think. But increasingly, we've been able to sort of negotiate terms of service to a point where we feel comfortable moving to the cloud. And the trend is clear. I've named off all of these big services that are in the cloud. Right now, you could talk about sort of Microsoft Office and Adobe Creative Suite. Right now, we distribute those to the campus, in terms of desktops as desktop software. It's pretty clear that a year or two from now, we'll be talking about a cloud service. So those will be big offerings. But one of the things I had to do in terms of defining services for the campus is work with vendors, sort of vendor management, negotiation in terms of defining services and addressing all this stuff. It takes a lot of work, and this is redundant work that other campuses are also doing. So why can't we all sort of get together And that brings up sort of the argument for the Net Plus community. So the real value I see is in terms of bringing together institutions that all have the same concerns. One of the things I got tired about in terms of dealing with individual vendors on my own is bringing up a concern that was clearly one that all of my other colleagues were raising, but getting very little traction negotiating as an individual institution. As large as we are, you know, it's much better when you're representing 100 institutions and saying, these are the features we want. So in terms of the kinds of value that we get from Net Plus, it's all the sort of the bureaucratic stuff, the policy stuff, the contract negotiation, but it's also the community and the discounted pricing, all of which we appreciate.
That's great. And Noah, maybe we just had one of the Box Advisory Board meetings with 8 universities and Box fairly recently. It was within the last month or so.
Right.
And maybe you could talk about that experience in particular, because Berkeley, along with 7 other universities, were the universities that first established the Box program. And one thing that's unique about the program is that it's, instead of pricing the service on a per user basis, so Box's commercial pricing is somewhere in the order of $30 per user per month, which is not really realistic if you're talking about deploying to 40 or 50,000 users or 60,000 users or even 10,000 users or 1,000 users, right? And so one of the things that the universities did in setting up that program was to find a campus-wide subscription price that would allow institutions like Berkeley and the other institutions to deploy it campus-wide without having to count users and deal with a sort of per-user pricing. But more recently, we have an ongoing engagement where those universities sit down and meet with Box on a quarterly basis. And as I mentioned, we just had one of those advisory board meetings. And Noah, you were there, I was there. So maybe you could tell a bit about how that meeting went as an example of the kind of engagement on an ongoing basis that we have in Net Plus with the providers and the rest of the community.
Right. So one of the things I see is clearly from these advisory meetings is it's a win-win on both sides, from the vendor side and from the user side, and a three-way, I guess, and from the Net Plus side as well, in that we get insight into the product roadmap. So they see us, the advisory board, all of these institutions coming together for an on-site meeting. They trot out all of their product managers. So that's a great part about the meeting, is access to and visibility into the roadmap. So what are you working on? We need this information if we're going to plan and appropriately position our services for the campuses. We want to make decisions looking a year out, 2 years, make big decisions about, well, do we want to have the service around anymore? Is there a new space that's opening up? Can the service fill that need? So that's pretty important. But then the other piece is then to hear from our colleagues about things, and sometimes they're things that have sort of no bearing on the sort of the technical sort of service. They're just about policy on our end. So one example of that would be all of us need to do a better job of account deprovisioning. We have a lot of people coming and going, and you can't just you need to appropriately close out accounts and ensure sort of appropriate institutional stewardship of data as well. And so these are things and we all have different policies that we have in place. So some people, for example, extend email or for example, storage service to alumni. And so they can continue to have access to the service. Other people want to roll them out in a certain roll out accounts in a certain way. People have different sort of expiration policies. But how we do that, how we access the APIs and things like that in order to do that account deprovisioning. Perhaps a piece of code has been developed at Stanford or Michigan, so we can reuse that. Another problem we all share is integration with groups. So it happens in this case, Box is still working to fully address the solution on their end, but actually there's some things we need to do on our end as institutions in order to integrate and provide a nice solution to support campus groups, which is key to collaboration. So there's a number of sort of workarounds and nice solutions that other peer institutions have come up with. So that's a great opportunity for sharing that kind of information as well.
So, Noah, you mentioned a little bit about the sort of common challenges that universities face, whether it's deprovisioning users or dealing with group support and sharing knowledge between universities has been an important part of sort of moving to the cloud. But I wonder if you could actually take the focus now to the campus side. And so what's been the campus experience for end users at Berkeley in moving to cloud services? So switching LMS is, that's a big deal, right? To go from one LMS to another, because that's a widely used service on campus. Deploying something like Box or Blue Jeans, where the intent is to make the service ubiquitous, what's been the feedback from end users? How have these services been perceived on campus when you roll them out? And what's that move to the cloud been like for your end users?
So very quickly, overall, the reception has been quite positive. Adoption rate has been quick. Growth has been viral, and largely because what you're seeing is a richer feature set at a reduced cost, both for us, the institution, but also for end users in terms of when you're asking end users to bear some of the costs, additional storage and things like that. So right, in terms of the impact of cloud services, rapid adoption. One of the important things that people see that we've been struggling with is when we do our own sort of DIY, either commercial or open source alternative to a cloud service. In the past, one of the things we struggled with is the collaboration and sharing across institutional boundaries, and also the scaling in terms of demand and access to resources. And cloud services, by their very nature, are global and are highly scalable. And so that pretty much solves that problem for the campus.
Great, thanks. Well, maybe, I know we have a bunch of time left in this session, and I'd be interested to hear questions, comments from the audience and all of you. I would be glad to answer any questions about the announcements this morning from CENIC and Merit about the availability of Net Plus services to the K-12 community and to other communities. So if there are any questions about that or the Net Plus program, I'd be glad to answer them. And then Noah, I'm sure we can put you on the spot a little bit more to talk about Berkeley's experiences if you all have questions about some of the specific services or how the implementation has gone. So why don't we open up to some questions and comments? Yeah.
Simple question. I'm K-12, so we can't charge a fee to our kids if it becomes part of our core offering. What's the cost of a solution with Box and stuff to go virtual? What would it cost our districts on a per student basis to, we get, I don't know, $4,000 per kid to educate it for a year?
Sure, absolutely. I can speak to that. So for all of the Net Plus services, if you go onto Internet2's website, and I imagine this is ultimately going to be on CENIC and Merit's websites as well, but you can see the pricing for each service, and it's usually on an institution-wide basis. So in the case of the Box service, it's priced based on students, faculty, staff for the institution. Now, that was designed for higher education, so we may have to tinker with the model a little bit, because it may be that students under the age of 13 or 14 don't get a Box account. You may not want to have students counted in it, or on the other hand, you might want to deploy a service like a Box or certainly a learning management service to the students as well. So we may have to come back to that on a Net Plus program level as we expand out to K-12. But in the case of Box, one of the things that the universities did in setting up that program was move away from the per user pricing model to come up with tiers based on the full institution size. And again, these are all published on the Internet2 website, so you can get a sense of what they are. But it amounts to something over 95% discount off of their commercial rates, because it's an apples to oranges kind of situation. Instead of pricing per user, it's a subscription basis.
$300 a year per kid is not even anywhere we can think about.
Right, exactly. And I think for higher education, for universities as well, if you had a service that was going to cost, $30 per user per year, it would have to be something maybe for the chancellor's office or,
right.
for executive leadership, not something you could deploy campus-wide. So that's a challenge that within the service development phase that the universities tackle in defining these offerings. And we're open to sort of continuing to work with the providers to change it as we think about these services for K-12 as well.
I think the value, though, that you're talking about with consists of us all trying to negotiate agreements with each of these vendors individually, as well as vetting them for all of those FERPA and HIPAA issues and SIPA issues that we have to all battle with. The fact that it may have been vetted already, and the fact that some of these policies, and you can learn from each other on it. I mean, I think that really that proposed legislation that is now in California about the whole privacy thing with student information is a knee-jerk reaction to the fact that we all haven't done that. And so you've got districts jumping onto Google and jumping onto different cloud-based services without even looking at those privacy issues. And now all of a sudden they're facing this and don't know whether the vendor is going to provide it or not. I think in many cases having that vetted through something like Internet2 or the Net Plus would really help a lot of the K-12s out. So.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the things we try to do. I do want to just sort of correct one point or point out that it's actually not Internet2 giving the seal of approval that it's been vetted. It's really, we look to a group of universities in the service validation phase. So in the case of Box, it was Berkeley and 7 others. In the case of Canvas, it was a different group of 6 or 7 universities that got together.
So can you explain, maybe
Sure.
you can explain that process a little bit. So each of the universities then vetted those policies and then shared them with each other?
It's something like that. So what we do is we first of all find out and determine if there's interest from the community. So in the case of a new service that's proposed, it would be Berkeley, coming to Internet2 and saying, hey, we're using this service. We want to see if there's interest in the community, in validating it and developing it. And in fact, that's been happening fairly recently with the service that Noah and some of his colleagues brought forward that is used actively at Berkeley, where they want to sponsor it into Net Plus. And so then we talk with the provider and we say, okay, provider, you've got a university customer, they're pleased with your product, they've been using your service, and now do you want to go through the Net Plus validation process? At that point, the provider has to, of course, say yes, and we have, a document that the provider signs that's an MOU where the provider commits to working with the community like this. And then we look to see if we can get 5 to 7 other universities together who have an interest in the service. And if we get that quorum of a total of 5 to 7, 6 to 8 universities, we get the commitment on the part of the provider, then everyone sits down together. And it's not a matter of looking at the provider's terms and conditions and rewriting them. It's really a matter of those universities getting together and saying, here's what we need. We need FERPA. We need a BAA. We need, data handling provisions. We need all these other things. And it may or may not work out, right? I mean, the provider may not be willing to do what the community needs, or the universities may not be satisfied with the responses, or the business model may not be quite right. So it could still, not work out at that point. But that's the service validation phase that we go through with all of the services. And so it's not really Internet2 or the provider saying, yes, I want to be in Net Plus. It's actually the institutions that sit down that have to validate and say, say thumbs up or thumbs down on moving forward.
So Andrew, is there any way that the non, Internet2 schools can, sort of say, hey, here's some apps that we are interested in using, can they get into this process as well?
I think that would be great. And I think that would be something that would be done through CENIC or through, the regional networks in the state. So we had a case, in the case of Canvas, the LMS, it was very widely used by the Utah Education Network, the regional network in Utah. And so UEN, actually representing both higher ed and K-12 and community college, their constituency, UEN actually participated in the service validation for Canvas and so helped develop it. So I think if there are services that are of interest to the K-12 community, to community colleges, to institutions that are not members of Internet2, those would go up through CENIC, right? And then we could work together with CENIC and then bring in a higher ed institution in California or elsewhere to do that kind of validation and development.
Like it would go through Merit.
Right, through Merit or through CENIC, yeah. Merit is going to be doing the sort of the other side of the house in terms of institutions subscribing to services and things like that. So, yes, either CENIC or Merit, yeah.
I just wanted to add, I also see it as a competitive advantage for a service provider to be a part of the Net Plus initiative and the broader community, just because I want to do this together with my colleagues at other universities. It's too much work for us to do it, and too much redundant work for us to do it alone. And
Yeah.
it's not just the sort of the policies, but actually they do a lot of work in terms of defining different tiers of service that make sense for our communities, that are distinct from what's out there. And this is particularly important for service providers that maybe don't play in the education space, right? That are mostly sort of like, it could be, before Box was working with higher ed, maybe they're working mostly with large corporations, right? And that's a much more sort of top-down culture. There's all kinds of differences we could make, or distinctions we could make in terms of the requirements between a typical corporation and a university or a elementary school, high school.
Yeah, there was another question over here.
I co-chaired a UC-wide committee doing a study on cloud computing. And one of the recommendations we made was, as you're doing the planning, plan in an exit strategy in case the service got too expensive or just went away. Is that something that Net Plus could help out with?
I think absolutely. And so we have some template business agreements that the community has developed. We've had over 100 universities, Internet2 member institutions have had their purchasing and legal folks help develop these community contract templates. And there are some key clauses in those agreements. First of all, around data portability, and so the ability to migrate data off of a service. Now it gets a bit complicated when you have a service like Box, because the data can be migrated out of Box if an institution decides it doesn't want to continue with the service. But in using the Box platform, there's all sorts of ability to comment on files, and there's all sorts of data around your data in Box. And we haven't quite figured out yet, I don't think, how that data would be migrated out. I mean,
it's not an easy problem to solve, but
Right.
it's an important question to ask. So I think for us, we look for open standards, for robust APIs. We do look at the exit strategy for every service.
Right.
And then in the end, I think you decide, well, if we really had to, is it good enough to just ask users to retrieve their content, or for us to, or do we have the ability to do that ourselves? You want to at least be able to answer that, and then progressively have better answers. But yeah, it's an important question.
So yeah, absolutely. And so we've got the data portability piece, even though that gets a little bit problematic based on the type of service, but that's something that we talk about with the providers. And then the other piece of this is that Internet2 ourselves has a mechanism for sunsetting a service, right? So it's one thing if an institution says, we're not interested in using Box or Canvas or one of these other services anymore, we need to migrate our data off. But then there's quite another thing if the community decides that, this service just isn't really useful anymore, not worth the money, the provider's been bought by somebody else. I mean, things change, and the cloud moves very quickly, technology moves very quickly, as everybody in this room knows. So we build into the business agreements with the providers a sunset clause for the service in Net Plus. And so the advisory board for that service, the universities, the institutions that are on that advisory board, they can make a recommendation on behalf of the community that says, this service is no longer meeting the community's needs. We need to sunset it. Internet2 should stop offering the service through Net Plus with a 6-month kind of clause to sunset the service. Now, that doesn't interrupt any of the individual universities or institutions using that service. If they're happy with the service, they can keep using it. Their agreement reverts to a direct agreement with the provider. So we don't want to be in the position of saying everybody's got to move from one to another, because that would be just, that would be a different. Right. Yeah. And that's not the role. But the idea would be, if the service is no longer useful according to the advisory board, who are the experts representing the community on that service, then it doesn't make sense. Maybe new institutions aren't subscribing or something like that. So we've been thinking about these issues, and I think we need to continue to think about them because they're multifaceted. But you're absolutely right that when you're dealing with the cloud service, it's crucial to think about the exit strategy, whether it's an individual institution or a service offering as a whole.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
We'll see more about this soon, right?
Yeah.
Just go to the website.
Yep.